Hi there, Andre from Peak Motorcycles here. I'm here in the Peak District and this video is my first ride video of the Caofen F80 road legal trail bike. You can just see it over my shoulder there. It's got an 8 kilowatt motor. Apparently it will do 55 miles an hour. The speed limit for most of the Peak District roads is 50. There's a little bit of 60 where I think I can push it a little bit further, see if I can get up that far. So what I'm going to do is this ride is only going to be on roads. So I'm going to take the westerly route out of Edale, so up the hill, see how it copes going up a fairly steep hill for quite a long time, see what that does to the battery. It's on 100% now, so it's only a couple of miles, but it climbs about 200 meters. I guess that's about 650 feet, something like that. I'm then going to ride it down the Hope Valley down towards Hathersage, and then going to take it up towards Burbage, around the tops and back. Now if I've got enough time I might sneak in a bit of a trail ride along the Houndkirk Road. Those of you who know the area know that it's part of the Trans-Euro Trail. Now I've done a separate video talking through all the details about the bike, so I'm not going to cover that again right now. I will put all the details in the description for this video. Right then, that's enough talking. I'm going to get out and see what it's like to ride something quiet. Right then, here we go, first ride on the Caofen F80. So as you can see, it's got a very simple dash. So far this bike has done 94 miles. It's currently in level 1, which I think is the slowest. I do have a 100% battery, it's completely full, and the regen braking is on. So I think that is everything I need. Side stands up. Oh, there we go. Now I have it ready, so that means it's good to go. Off we go. So that's flat out in gear number 1, where it'll do 26 miles an hour as I'm zipping along here now through Edale. 27, a little bit of downhill. Right, I'm now going to try level 2. That's level 2 now. Okay, there's definitely a bit more zip about that. I just turned the throttle and off it went. I mean, it's not massive, if I'm honest. That's 37 miles an hour that I'm doing. It's a nice little sort of whirring sound, but it's definitely not noisy. That's 39 with the throttle pinned. Now this road does have a 60 mile an hour limit, so yeah, that alone probably wouldn't be enough. I've been riding along now for a couple of minutes like this. Some of the other electric bikes I've ridden on, you really get a feel for that just sort of instant torque and power. So far this hasn't really had that, but now I'm going up a hill, so I'll see what this is like. That's still in second gear, and that's just about managing to pull me up here at 34 miles an hour. So I think I'm going to have a try at number 3. That's third now. Let's see what that does. 36, 37, 39, 40, 42, 43. So I mean, this is quite a steep hill that we're going up, still pulling at 42. Just going to slow down for this bend. See what else it'll do up here. This is about the steepest hill that there is around here. 45, 46, 47, 48, 49. Well, that's hit 50 already, and that's pulling my rather heavyweight 52 up this hill. Those of you who have ever cycled here or ridden around here, you'll know that this road is the road that goes up to Mamnick. It's often used by motorcycle companies for photo shoots and things where they want to get a nice shot looking down, which we'll see at the top. It's certainly quite nippy through these corners though. The suspension is quite, if anything I'd say it was quite hard. Not hard, maybe firm. Maybe firm is the right word. I did wonder whether it would just be very spongy and soft, but this actually seems to be fairly well set up for a rider of my weight. It is definitely zipping up here. I mean, it's not, you know, that sort of instant acceleration that you'll get on a big bike or even on a big electric bike, but it's certainly not struggling. Although having said that, I'm nearly at the top of here, and I think I've used nearly 10% of the battery. So that's climbing up about 200 meters up to the top of where the road goes over near Mamtor, which you can see just up there ahead of me. So for climbing that 200 meters almost full throttle, pulling the 80 kilos of the bike and the 100 kilos of me up the hill, that's 89%. So what I'm going to do is at the top I'm going to ride down Winnets down into Castleton and see how much the regen braking adds from that descent, because it's dropping a similar amount of height to up here quite steeply, so I'm hoping that is going to add some So let's see, so that's down to 88% from that climb at full throttle. Hopefully this will do some regen coming down through here, and then there'll be some more coming down into Castleton. Let's see how much a difference this makes. Bottom of here is quite a tight bend, but yeah, this bike is so small, there's such a tight turning circle. And actually that pulls away up to 30, whoops, no clutch, that pulls away up to 30 pretty quickly. I don't know if you got to see how that zipped along. But it does feel small. I mean, it is a small bike, right? It's only 80 kilos. I do feel like the handlebars are quite close to me. That thing I mentioned about the firm suspension, just going over those bumps in the road, I certainly felt that. I mean, I'm sure it is tunable, but right now I've just taken it pretty much as it is. So on 88% from that short downhill. I don't suppose it would charge a lot. That again is with the throttle pinned, 44, 45, 47, so there's a 50 limit, so it will hit the limit for around here. So this is now me going to turn down into Winnets. So this road is kind of a steep hill, it's 1 in 5 straight down into this valley. So 87% it says now after that little uphill. Just seeing what it's going to do with the regeneration coming down this hill. I'm not sure how much when I pull the brake, how much of that is the regen and how much is the friction brake. Actually, one thing I do find is that this bike is really narrow, like really narrow. I don't know if you can see when I look down, but I'm used to having a fuel tank there and at least the width of a petrol bike, and you kind of get used to that riding position. This feels not quite like a push bike, but it's not far off it. So the thing about the narrow seat, coming down here, I'm used to having something I can grip with my knees. My knees are almost together trying to grip the narrow front of this. Well, it's still 88%, so it's gone up very slightly with the regen coming down this hill, but not a lot. It does feel like the brakes have been working quite hard. There's certainly a bit of a noise. That might just be the regen going. Now I'm just coming down into Castleton. It's kind of quiet at this time of an evening. Must be about 7 PM, even though it's the school holidays. It's quite easy just to ride slowly as well. You know, I think a lot of these electric motorcycles, the way that the motor controllers are done is that you do have, you know, a bit more control at lower speeds. And actually, if you're riding around here 20 miles an hour, and when you feel just how light it is, you can just really, you know, throw it around. Throttle is just sensitive enough. It's kind of odd that people don't look round. I think it's almost silent. You can hear that sort of slight whirring sound from the motor, but not a lot else. And you just give a bit of a twist and off it goes. Another thing that I'm keeping an eye on now is what the battery life is like when I'm just cruising along. So currently down to 87%, having used almost all of that in the first couple of miles just going up a big hill under full throttle, dragging my weight up it. Since I've been coming downhill and on the flat, the numbers haven't really moved. Now I'm sure it has more than enough range for what I'm looking to do today, but nevertheless it's something I do want to keep an eye on. I think with this, it's, you know, it's not like a bike I can just stop at anywhere to charge it. I think I do need the special charger and the charging cable, which I didn't bring with me. So if I run out, I'm kind of stuffed and I have to ring someone to come and get me. On this bit of road, it is actually a 60 mile an hour limit, so I'm just going to see how fast I can get it to go. It's 50 already on the dash. I've got my phone with a GPS speedo as well, so that's at 48. Okay, so it says 54 on the dash, and that's flat out, that's pinned, and that says 48 miles an hour. Okay, now coming into a 40, so I'll just slow that down for a moment. So almost hit 50, but not quite. When I get through this bit, there is another stretch where I can have another go. So it looks like currently at this speed, the speedo reads about 4 miles an hour faster than the GPS. But I'm just coming through here, coming up to another national speed limit, so another 60 mile an hour stretch. So here we go again. That's pinned. 40, 41, 44, 45, 48. I think we're going to 49. Can we get 50? If I tuck in a little bit, will it get to 50? No, 49 might be all it's got with me on it. Yeah, 48, 49 miles an hour. Well, that's a little bit slower than what I would have hoped. I know the dash says a lot more than that, but to have the GPS as a way to check it is kind of useful. It's coming in amongst these cyclists now. Right then, I think the next thing will be a test of the suspension, so I'm going to head up to Burbage for that. So I've been out riding for about 20 minutes, half an hour now. So I've been up from Edale up to Mamnick, and then down Winnets and through Castleton and through Hathersage, and now I'm on my way up to Burbage, for those of you that know this area. So my first thoughts are, it feels really small, and this is both good and bad. I think as a trail bike, I think it's brilliant. I think as a road bike, I'm struggling a bit, especially when going down steep hills. I'm used to having a fuel tank in front of me, and it's quite a narrow thing to have to grip with your knees if you're not used to it, and I'm very much not used to it. It's also quite a small bike. I guess it doesn't need to be any bigger, but I'm used to having maybe slightly higher bars, slightly further forwards. Nothing that some risers and maybe a different handlebar couldn't change. But yeah, that's just from how it comes out of the shop. I did wonder whether the suspension would be a little bit soft. It's actually quite the opposite. It's very firm indeed. On road, it's got a really nice solid feel to it that gives you a lot of confidence going through corners. Going over bumps, it did judder around a bit. Now, it hasn't been set up for me and it is fully adjustable, so I'm sure a lot of that could be dialed out if need be. The battery consumption, you know, going up the hills, I did certainly notice it dropping down quite a lot, but then going downhill, it almost seemed to do nothing. The brakes going down Winnets, which is a 20%, it's a 1 in 5 hill. Towards the bottom, I could certainly feel that they were, I don't know, maybe getting a little bit warm, needed a bit of an extra squeeze just to make sure that I could stop at the bottom. Nothing that really made me feel unsafe, but I'd noticed it where quite often on motorcycles I hadn't noticed it before. As you can see, I had the speedo on for that last stretch, so on the dead flat, with me sitting mostly upright, there was no headwind. The dash was reading mid-50s and I was getting up to almost 50. On the GPS speedo, so 48, 49 miles an hour. Didn't quite get to 50. I'm sure on a downhill you could, but then on a downhill you've got extra assistance anyway. So that was a bit disappointing. I was hoping maybe it would get up to 55 in real terms. I mean, you're not going to lose your license on it, and for a trail bike that's probably fine. If you're going to try and use it like a dual sport where you're going to be going on some faster roads, I think it needs a little bit more. Having said that, there's a lot of bikes out there, electric motorcycles, which do a claimed 45 miles an hour, which I thought was definitely too slow. I've yet to try one of those and find out how close to that 45 they really do get. The fact this has even got just 5 miles an hour more does make quite a big difference. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to ride up that road behind me up to Burbage. It's quite a bumpy road even though it is paved, so that'll give me a good chance to see what the road suspension is like on this bike. So I'll talk you through that, probably stop at the top for a couple of pictures, and then ride home the long way round and see what else I can do with it. Right, then off we go. I'd normally turn a key about now, but obviously there's nothing like that to do. So just a bit of a twist of the throttle and away we go. So this is a stretch of road that I quite often use just for seeing what road suspension is like. I mean, it is paved, but it is quite bumpy. Now, I mentioned when I stopped that I did feel like the suspension on this bike was quite firm, and I am feeling these bumps as I go over them. I don't know if you can hear it changing my voice, but it doesn't seem to be upsetting the handling, and things like that are just damping with one go. There's a slightly bigger bump just there that I did feel, but plenty of other bikes do far worse than that. It also just will quite happily pull up to 40 miles an hour. Did it going up Edale, doing it going up here very easily. But what I think you don't quite get is you don't get that acceleration that you get from being in gears on a bike. You know how you can drop a cog just to get that extra bit of torque out of the bend, especially at the higher speeds on this. At 40, when you when you open the throttle partway around a corner to try and power out of it, it's almost at the the upper limit of what the motor's going to do. Whereas if you're on a road bike, and okay, probably not a 125, but if you're on anything from maybe a 300, 400cc upwards, that's making maybe 30 horsepower, it's the sort of bend where you drop it down to third gear, maybe even second gear, just sort of go around on that and then open up the throttle and out you'd come. So it doesn't have that sort of feel. I know when I rode a Zero, I was very much amazed by the acceleration. But you have to bear in mind that bike is 3 times the price of this. Now this bike is just under £6,000 in the UK versus 18 for a for a 0, and I think a live wire was something like 28. So, you know, it's not really a fair comparison to say those bikes have just got brutal electric acceleration and this hasn't. So having got to the top of that, I'm now down to 61% battery. I'm going to zip along over the tops here and then take another slightly different route back. It is starting to go dark and it is getting a bit colder, so it will give me an opportunity to try out these headlamps and see what they're like, which is always good to know. I'm not quite sure how often this will be used at night, at least by me. I think this might be the only evening ride that I do, but I'm sure if people are riding it in cities. Oh, you know what, there it is again, coming into this bend, sort of braking in the approach as I come in. I do feel the regen braking kicking in, but I also feel my body sliding forwards because I don't have that fuel tank to lean against. I'm sure enduro bikes are kind of the same, but this just feels really, really narrow, and it's not something that I'm used to. So coming down through here, I do have a downhill stretch that's quite long and straight with a 60-mile-an-hour limit. So if I'm ever going to get even the speedo on here up to 55, 56, maybe higher, this is where I'm going to do it. Let's see what this will do down here. 52, 54, which is kind of where I got to before, 55. You know, it almost feels like the controller is holding it there and not letting it go quicker than 55 on the clock, which I think 55 on the clock was actually 49 on the actual speedo on the GPS. So yeah, that's been pinned. Even coming down here where it's a downhill, yeah, I'm not getting over 55, and now I'm back down into a 30. So maybe that's the limit then, 55 on the dial, 49 on the GPS. So what else can I tell you about the bike? The stock mirrors are kind of small. The one on the right I need to tighten up, but they give me enough visibility behind. Obviously there's no vibrations from the engine like you might get on a single cylinder petrol engine. The seat is not that comfortable. This isn't a surprise, and actually I've ridden enduro bikes that are as comfortable as this. I think part of it is the shape. It's very narrow because it's just a very narrow bike, and you know, for a sort of a short use trail bike, it really doesn't need to be anything else. So just dipping through these corners, I suppose if you get the throttle just right like that, that does actually glide quite nicely, and brake a little bit coming in, and then getting on the throttle kind of just before the apex, and then coming out. Yeah, that is actually kind of fun. I do quite enjoy that. So one thing I haven't really mentioned, and it's one of those things until you realise you haven't noticed it, you don't think of mentioning it, is the sound. So it has that kind of a whir that you probably heard when I set off at low speed. But actually once you're going, it does feel almost silent. About 40 miles an hour you don't even hear the whine of the engine. Now I don't have my earplugs in. I kind of thought it was a bit pointless if I was going out riding an electric bike. I can hear the wind noise, and I can hear a bit of noise from the tyres on the road, but I can't hear anything else. It's quite hard to hear the whir of the engine even. And because it's such a small bike, you know, even if I lean forward a bit, almost everything is out of my peripheral vision, and you do feel a bit like you're flying. I mean, I know motorbikes do that anyway, any motorbike does that, but with that sort of feeling of silence, that's definitely a different experience to riding a petrol motorcycle. Is it better? Is it worse? Not sure. You know, I think that with any motorcycle, for me at least, it does have to be that emotional connection. It has to be something when you get on it you think, yeah, this is something that I love doing. I'm not sure if I get that from this, and you know, I haven't got it from every bike. You know, not every bike I've ridden I've thought, oh yeah, this is it. And I think some of it is just that this is a different experience, and it certainly is that. I mean, it almost feels to me a little bit like a really fast bicycle. I mean, like silly fast. The fact I can now potter along quite happily, 46 it says on the dial, so that's probably just over 40 miles an hour. It doesn't feel skittish, it doesn't feel like it's jumping around, it doesn't feel like it's on the limit. And I know with some electric motorcycles you can get them chipped, not sure on the legality of that, but you can certainly get them to do an awful lot more than they'll do at the showroom. Maybe this will be the same. Looking down at the battery as I come over the tops now, it's now down to 45%. I think that's the last of the hills that I'm going to be doing today. From here I've got a long run down past Foxhouse, and then back down to Hathersage and back to Edale. So coming back down into the Hope Valley now. I think the sun set a couple of minutes ago, I still have quite a lot of light, but it is going darker. Down to 40% battery now. I get a bit of regen coming down the hill, and then it'll be quite a lot of pin throttle for the ride back. I'm getting a little bit cold, so I'm missing my heated grips a little bit. I mean, it's nice to know it's got a heated battery, but I think on a day like this, where I know we had quite heavy frost last night, so it must be only probably a few degrees here in the UK, so you've got no wind protection or anything on the bike. What I would say is the headlamp is really good. I mean, it's not a very big thing. It's you know, you saw it with that LED riding lamp. I don't know if you can see it on the road. I mean, it's not fully dark, it's still very much twilight here, and it's illuminated. It's got a really nice shape on the ground. You know, sometimes a headlight has, like, you know, bits in it that aren't quite as well illuminated, but this certainly seems to have enough of a spread, and this is on the dipped beam. I think it'll be darker still by the time I get closer to Edale, so I will try that on dipped and then on full. You know what I'm struggling with is getting used to not having a clutch. You know, coming down through here when it comes into the 30 zone, I just drop a gear or two, so that by the time I got here to the 30 sign, I was doing the speed. And the bike feels so light. It's almost, you know, when you try and, you know, if you're riding it like you'd ride a normal motorcycle, where you actually kind of have to plan a bit and move your body around, it's, you know, it's 80 kilos and all that weight is really low down. It's got such a low centre of gravity. There's no, you know, even 10 litres, 15, 20 litres of fuel high up between your legs to rock around. It's all very much at the very, very bottom of the bike and at the front of the bike where the battery is and where the motor is. So the handling is really, really sharp. Almost too sharp when you're just out for a bit of a cruise. So yeah, you do have to keep your wits about you with that, but it is fun, you know, if you want to like throw it into something. What I still need to get used to is that combination of this sort of flickability, but then not having that sort of pushing on acceleration above 40 miles an hour. You know, even above 30, well, actually downhill at above 30, yeah, it does go all right, I take that back. Above 40 miles an hour, you don't get that same sort of acceleration you might get out of a motorcycle where you dropped a gear or two. Just turned off the main road at the old hall in Hope onto Edale Road, and I've just noticed I've got a battery light flashing. So from the riding I've done so far, I'm now down to 22% of the battery life. I think I've done about 35 miles, something like that. The odometer's now saying 122, so I'm not sure. I should have made a note of exactly what it was on. I think it was on 89 before I left. So yeah, maybe just over 30 miles and I have a low battery warning. I'm hoping that it is going to get me home. It should do. It's only about 4 miles from here and I do have 22% remaining. Oh, it's so quiet when you stop. Really, really quiet. So what I am finding since the battery light started flashing is it's like it's in get you home mode. So right now going up this hill it's only doing 32 and this is still in third gear. As it levels out, 34. I think the most I've had it up to on this stretch has been 39, so it will go a bit, but even though I'm in the gear 3 or the number 3, which is the, you know, where it would get up to 54, 55, it seems that when you're running low on battery it does scale that down a bit. I think that's good in a way, because it does mean that, you know, you're not going to overstretch it and you will get home. The problem for me is this road is a 60 mile an hour road, and if I go out and do what has been a fairly short ride and I can only ride back at 35 miles an hour on a 60 mile an hour road, that is kind of not ideal for me. What you can see right now is just how bright this is in the dipped beam. Hopefully this is showing up on the GoPro, but that really is quite nice and bright and a really you know, useful beam pattern. So coming up here, throttle is pinned 37, 36, 35. I mean, I'm down to 17% battery, so I'm sure it's doing it for a reason. But yeah, that's well, it's better than being stuck out in the middle of nowhere at this time of night, I suppose. But at the same time, I didn't feel like I'd actually gone that far. I mean, I think 35 miles, something like that. And yeah, a lot of it has been at full throttle, and I have been pushing on a bit and trying to get as much out of this as I can. But even still, the fact that it goes into this sort of go slow mode to get me back, while being better than being stuck out in the middle of nowhere, is probably a little bit less performance than I would need because of where I live and the fact I live on a road that has a 60 mile an hour speed limit. So I'm not far from being home now. This is coming back into Edale Village. Check out full beam for a sec. Oh, there we go, that's the full beam. Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. What is slightly disconcerting is when you go from full beam to to dipped, you have to go through off. So rather than being off half full, you go off, you go like half beam or like dipped beam off and then full. So even now when I switch back again, you do get that moment of darkness switching through it. I mean, you can do it quick. Yeah, I suppose if you just hit the button it doesn't really stand out, but the first time I did it I could certainly notice that it was going from full to half. I'm back home. It's up to 127 miles now on the bike, and I'm down to 15% battery, so it did limp back the last bit, but it did get me home, so that was good. Yeah, I'll go and put the bike away and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So that's it. That is back from my first test ride on the Caofen F80 road legal, I guess, trail bike. So today I've only been out on the roads, so the opinion I'm going to give you now is based on how I found it as a road bike. So I found the suspension was really good. I thought the power delivery was okay. It wasn't quite as brutal as some of the electric bikes that I've ridden, but then again it's only £6,000, it's not 20 or 30,000 pounds. So for the price I'm sure you lose a bit on the batteries and also on the motor. I would happily do 50 miles an hour. I would struggle to get any more out of it than that. And for where I live, when the roads are 60 mile an hour limits in a lot of places, that is a bit of a problem. I also found that once I'd got below maybe 25% battery, it did go into the get you home mode, which was fine, except it dropped me down to 35, 36 miles an hour probably, and the street I live on has a 60 mile an hour limit, and crawling back at that speed, you know, it is a little slow. I thought the riding position was okay, felt a little bit small for me, but I'm 6'1". The seat was not particularly comfortable, but then again for the battery life you'd easily get one battery's worth of sitting on it, and yeah, by the time I got home, you know, I was not exactly glad to get off it, but I certainly felt that it is as comfortable as it looks. For the brakes, I thought the brakes were okay. I think on long downhills it did feel like they were being stretched a bit. I don't know if that's the regen braking, but I think for me again, I'm used to having a bit more stopping power than that on my bike, so maybe it's just something to get used to. So now the big question, would I have one? I have been thinking about this all the way back. I think it's a really good bike, and I think it's really interesting to see what's coming out at this price point, because a lot of people don't want to spend £20,000 on an electric motorcycle. I think if you're coming off a big bike and you're used to that sort of power and acceleration you get, I think you might find it a bit disappointing. If you're coming off a 125, it's probably quite comparable, maybe even a little bit quicker, so that might be more appealing. And I think for how it's priced, you know, it's the upper end of what you can pay for a 125, but it is that sort of money. I think if you live like I do out in the countryside where there's lots of 60 mile an hour roads, I certainly feel that I need a bike that can do 60 and can do 60 for a while. Unfortunately, they all seem to come at a much higher price. So, you know, with that, would I still think about getting one of these? I think I'd certainly consider it, but I think it needs to do a little bit more for me. I think if I lived in a town or a city and I needed something to get around that was priced as this is priced, and that I could also use for slightly longer journeys and do a bit of trail riding, I think it would be perfect. And it's really good to see bikes like this finally coming to the market. You know, if you think for £6,000, that's slightly more, I think, than a CRF 300L. You know, it doesn't have probably the top end, it won't do 60, 70 like those petrol bikes will. But if you want an e-bike, you want something lightweight, it is only 80 kilos, which really isn't very much at all, then I think it's certainly an interesting prospect. The range isn't massive, but then again, for the level of comfort and what this bike's for, I don't think that really matters. So, would I have one? I don't think so. Not for where I live and what I need from a motorcycle. Having said that, I think they're going to do really well. I think at that price point, there's nothing else really that comes close. So it'd be interesting to see how these bikes do when they hit the dealers. Right, that's it for me for tonight. Hope that's been interesting and useful. If it has, please check out my other content, and maybe I'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Oh, that was close.